Hello, friends. Thanks for stopping by for a little digging deep tonight. We're going to dig deep into another one of Jesus's parables. I love Jesus's stories. And so make yourself comfortable. Maybe get a cup of tea or decaf or whatever, and just kick back and let's see what we can find out. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had to deal with a clogged toilet? One time in the Seller's house, our toilet clearly had something blocking the flow, but we couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't like the normal kind of clog. We just didn't know why it wouldn't flush right. It wouldn't all go, the water wouldn't go down. So my husband pulled the toilet, tried to find what was the problem, couldn't find anything to cause this lack of flow of water. And so we put the toilet back, and then it started to leak around the base, so we had to pull it again and replace the seal. And we were just baffled. Finally, one of our sons confessed. He had accidentally dropped toenail clippers, the big ones, in the toilet. And not wanting to put his hand in the toilet, I guess, he just decided he would flush. And, there they were. So maybe it would have worked if the clippers had not been open, It might have worked, but you couldn't see it, so he thought he had taken care of the problem. So at first he denied having flushed anything down the toilet that he shouldn't, but after a while he came clean, and we told him, if you had just come and told us, we could have gotten the clippers out, and there wouldn't have been this big problem. It would have been a quick fix. Sometimes we're like that about sin in our lives. Unconfessed sin that we carry around clogs up the relationships that we have with God and with each other. We carry this sin around, and I'm not talking about gosh, I murdered someone and I don't want to confess that, but they're just things that we know that we shouldn't have done, or we should have done and we didn't, and they get in the way of our relationships. We carry it around because maybe we just don't want to admit it. We don't want to admit that we sin, because sometimes if we admit it, then we got to do something about it. Sometimes we make excuses for it. Well, it wasn't that bad. Other people do much worse things. It's not a big deal. Other people throw much worse things into the toilet and try to flush them. Or we might try to ignore it. We feel like something's not right, but I don't really want to examine my conscience. I don't really want to know what's causing the problem. Maybe it'll just go away. Maybe I can flush it and pretend like it didn't happen. And other times we carry this sin around because we think that God could never forgive us for it. It's so bad that we think God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. And if other people knew, they wouldn't want to have anything to do with me either. Not admitting our sin is bad, but so is magnifying the sin, so it's so large we don't think God can forgive it. And so we carry around the weight of our guilt. We might feel ashamed and try to hide it. It can actually make us physically ill. Now, it's important to know the difference between guilt and shame. I learned this from Brené Brown. There's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is feeling bad about something I did. Shame is about feeling bad about myself for who I am. Guilt is helpful. It reminds us of those core values we have, because when we do something that goes against the core values that we have, we feel icky, conflicted. And guilt lets us know that we need to deal with it. We need to do something about that feeling and what caused it. Guilt leads to confession for the act, which leads to forgiveness, which leads to freedom. Shame is not helpful. Shame is what we feel about ourselves and how awful we are. We focus on blaming ourselves rather than the act of sin. We focus on, I'm a bad person for doing that, rather than saying, that was wrong, that thing I did was wrong. So even if we confess the sin, we may still carry around that shame because we think that we're bad for just doing it in the first place. Our son could have felt shame about the toenail clippers in the toilet. He could have thought, I'm a bad son because I tried to flush giant toenail clippers that were open. But he chose to confess, own up to it, be forgiven, and not worry about it anymore. You see, God's mercy and forgiveness are endless, and they're freely given to us if we admit that we need them. So, a good story about forgiveness and grace is the parable of the prodigal son. And I'm reading from Luke 15, starting in verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods he was feeding to the pigs, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to the servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Remember, a parable is a made-up story that teaches something. It's like a metaphor in story form. And the parables that Jesus told often had several meanings to them. And there's a lot to learn from the story, but we're going to focus on the clog in the toilet, so to speak. The son had been disrespectful and greedy. Now, I know that none of us have ever been disrespectful or greedy. Right. Now, the son wastes all his money on wild living. Okay, correction, his father's money, and becomes so desperate that he takes a job tending pigs. Pigs were considered unclean for Jews, and so this job would have been really unpleasant for him and probably shameful. We don't know how long he lived like that, but at some point he realized that he could go home and see if his father would hire him. He thought, well, I just could stop being an idiot now and just go home. But he could have refused to admit that he screwed up. He could have allowed his pride to keep him from going back and just stay with the pigs. Or he could have let his shame at what he had done keep him from his father. He doesn't even consider the option that his father would forgive him and restore him to the family as the son. He spends the trip, I'm thinking, he spends the trip going home and he's rehearsing in his head what he's going to say to his father. Now, the father has obviously been waiting and watching for his son in case he comes home. And when he sees him coming, he's overjoyed. And the father hikes up his robes and runs to meet him. Now, no self-respecting Jewish man would ever hike up his robes and run anywhere. So men never did that. They didn't run, they didn't hike up their robes. And if anyone saw him, they would have had a good laugh at him. But he doesn't care. You see, in crafting this story, Jesus has deliberately made the Father look kind of ridiculous to drive home the point that this is how God feels about us. We think that God is waiting with arms crossed and a scowly face because of all the stupid stuff we've done. But God is not. God is ridiculously in love with us. The son, who has taken advantage of his privilege and the generosity of his father, has now returned home ashamed and fearful of what will happen to him. Imagine the son's surprise when his father gives him mercy and grace. The son is not just allowed to come home and hang out in the servants' quarters and work for free. Nope, he is restored to his place as the son in the family. Also, notice that the father doesn't complain to his friends and neighbors about his idiot son. He doesn't make the son take a Dave Ramsey course to figure out how to pay off his debt. He doesn't belittle the son or say, "I told you so." This is how God is with us. In Psalm 103, God is described like this. He doesn't deal with us according to our sin or repay us according to our wrongdoing. Because as high as the heaven is above the earth, that's how large God's faithful love is for those who honor him. As far as east is from west, that's how far God has removed our sin from us. Like a parent feels compassion for their children, that's how the Lord feels compassion for those who honor him. God is all about grace. It's about us getting what we don't deserve, just like the prodigal son. We're all prodigals at some point. A prodigal is one who leaves home and behaves recklessly, but then returns home. And when we return home to God, we find that God is running toward us with arms outstretched. Do we deserve that kind of reception? Of course not. That's why it's grace. As long as there is a clog in the pipe, there will be something in the way of the flow of water going where it should. And as long as I have unconfessed sin, there will be something in the way of the flow between me and God and me and you. And it might not be obvious right away. I mean, to my son, it looked like the clippers had gone down. Problem solved, right? We might not be aware of how clogged our relationship with God and others has become. But eventually things will start to overflow. Anger, sadness, the inability to forgive, loneliness. We'll wonder what happened to our joy. There's a clog. We have to admit that, like the prodigal son, we have run off and done what we wanted to do. We do what we want. We buy what we want, and we get so focused on what we could do that we don't stop and ask God if we really should. It's time for us to check in with God and see where we've driven the bus off the road. Because we can live in the pigsty, or we can live with joy. There is nothing that God won't forgive if you confess it. Confession is a gift. It brings relief. I bet you've all had that experience where you finally own up to something, you confess, or you apologize, and the weight that's lifted, it's such a relief. The toenail clippers had to be removed for the toilet to function properly. We couldn't ignore the clog, and we can't ignore the sin that clogs up our relationships. So, clear the clog. Will you pray with me? God, we admit that we are prone to try to hide our sins, to keep our mouths shut and hope we are not found out. But there is no place to hide from you. Our silence only makes us sick in body and spirit. That you delight in forgiving us and in covering our sin. You are glad when we confess our failings and our needs. Deliver us from our own stubbornness and help us to clear the clog. Amen. Well, thanks for joining me for just a little bit. I hope maybe you found something helpful in there in the prodigal son story, and now you know what a clogged toilet has to do with the prodigal son. So, if you missed Josh Wonders Why on Monday, it was our annual Peep tasting. And so if you missed it, go back and watch it if you're interested in knowing what flavors of Peeps you should look out for and buy, and which ones maybe you want to avoid. And then on Monday morning, I'll be back for Coffee with Kelly, and I'll ramble some more about something on my mind. And then we'll be back with Josh Wonders Why and another Digging Deep next week. But until then, have a blessed week. See you later.